Well, I wanted to do another video today. I woke up early and did some cleaning and I feel good. And I thought that I would take advantage of the extra time that I have to um, address some things that I've been thinking about. I keep in mind that I have some subscribers, and so if people find some of these videos interesting or useful, so much the better. Um, I've been thinking about the topic, does God exist? And of course, there can be no real proof that God exists. I think of the essence of the whole issue is the question of faith. Um, if we could prove that God exists, you really would not have faith. You would have proof. That's what the letter to the Hebrews says. Faith is regarding things that are not seen because, and Paul says in Romans also that, in hope we are saved. We don't quite see the object of our hope yet. So that clearly the whole issue of God is something that can only be responded to individually with faith or without faith. What strikes me as incredibly important, and I've thought so for many, many years, is what I have referred to as this evolutionary surplus or mental surplus, meaning our brains have developed way past any demand of survival, of hunting, gathering, planting, shelter, etc., even in snowy, cold countries, etc. So that what we have evolved or developed are brains that cause us much, more anxiety and fear and apprehension and anticipation and all kinds of things, to the extent that they're basically almost counter evolutionary. You could be driven mad. You can make many mistakes with ambition. You could develop idols. I don't think animals have idols, but people who want to amass money or power, look at Putin now in Ukraine, uh, become obsessed with things that the Bible calls idols. And so the whole issue of why do we have such brain power, what evolutionary function could it serve? Um, the answer to that is also almost shrouded in faith. You could say that um, smarter people survived better in warfare uh, and in other situations, and therefore there is a survival of the fittest or adaptative or evolutionary advantage to having brain power. But it, as I said, it also can bring incredible evils, or be the occasion for incredible evils. So that I think one of the greatest arguments for the existence of God is that there must be some reason or function for all this excess mental activity. That's where a wise man like St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. So that God provides, in many cases, a last resort for peace or composure or trust, etc. And obviously, trusting and even having faith is really the way to deal with apprehensions and fears and things like that. And so the notion of God appears on the scene as the focus of our mental activity. And that's why the Bible even, sort of begins with he created, man and woman, I guess, in his own image and likeness, etc. So that clearly human beings are different from animals, and clearly they have all this mental activity and they deal with it in various different ways. I have been reading a lot about 20th century poets. I'm about to finish a biography of T.S. Eliot, and An Imperfect Life. And Imperfect Life is the subtitle. And he's an example of a tortured man, a man from a Puritan background. So that I'm not an expert on T.S. Eliot, but I've read 434 pages about him at least. And this Puritan perfectionistic background sowed in him some some dissatisfaction with himself, abhorrence of sexuality, as embodied especially in women. Who knows what other issues were there? But he rejected, and this is common in poets, he rejected the provincialism, the narrowness of New England Puritan religion or culture. He was from a Brahmin family, Boston type, even though he was born in Missouri. And he wanted to expand. He wanted to have a much broader world. So he went off to England, where he became kind of like an Englishman. And one of the things I was just reading is very interesting. He had very good manners. And there's some, cross-reference here to Henry James, whom I have not really read. I did read with great avidity his brother William's Varieties of Religious Experiences when I was at Harvard. So I'm all into that stuff psychologically, but apparently this Henry James wrote about a man who discovers love in late life, etc. A guy named Marcher. And this man, John Marcher, he spends his whole life, it says here, marking time for a destiny more remarkable than love, for some rare and strange distinction. And I've seen this in people even that I know, they forego a sort of a normal love relationship, postponing it for something grander. And so this man in maturity recovers a relationship with a woman named May, who agrees to watch with him. It's very similar to Eliot. Eliot was always waiting for something. He had a over 30-year relationship with this almost like a childhood family friend, Emily Hale, who was in love with him and wanted to marry him. And he kept making her wait and then just being friends. And this woman pursued him very discreetly and moderately. She didn't stalk him or anything. Eliot had married a crazy woman, Vivian, who then he could not divorce because he had entered into the High Anglican Church. And he was always very chaste with this Emily and all this kind of thing. But then when Eliot is 69 and Emily is 66 or so, Eliot goes off and marries Valerie, who's like more than 30 years younger, and devastates this Emily Hale. So Emily Hale, sort of, in a sense, wasted her life in a sense, being Eliot's muse, only to be, in essence, betrayed towards the end of her life. She hadn't even gotten a college degree. She had tremendous difficulties at times finding a teaching job. And she collapsed after Eliot married this other woman, and it was like she had nothing more to live for. But this is what I wanted to read. Eliot used good manners, as Marchard does in this Henry James story, as the cover of the hidden life. He hadn't disturbed people with the queerness of their having to know a haunted man. So but he was ready nonetheless to be selfish just a little when he found a woman who would let him. He wore a mask painted with an expression of social decorum, but out of the eye holes there looked eyes with an expression that did not match. So that what you have there is an interesting case of a man seeking, perfection. You would have to say seeking God. He latches onto this very elaborate and deep tradition of the High Anglican Church, the closest to Catholicism that you can get, I guess, without the Pope. And that's how he tries to order all the stuff going on in his brain that he wrote about in a poem like The Waste Land. As I mentioned yesterday, after World War II, I think he wrote it in 1922. He got the Nobel Peace Prize, I guess, in 58. So this is a kind of like a textbook example of people who think a lot, just like Virginia Woolf, just like Sylvia Plath, both suicides. In the case of Eliot, no suicide, maybe flirted with it at some points, but nevertheless, you have an incredibly uh, elaborate attempt to come to terms with who you are, with varying degrees of success in that regard, but great success as a poet, great success as someone who expresses truths in a very powerful way. Again, art has been defined as the expression of the infinite in a finite work. And I run across this often in reading about these artists, in these cases, poets. And so you have this issue of why do we think so much, and is that an indication that only in God can we rest? And that's what Augustine, a great mind, said. Um, these days, as I have been saying, God appears more absent than ever. He may be more present now to the Ukrainians. I said that I heard the Ukrainians had bought up all the icons available, um, in the stores. So many times in great distress, there's this Vietnamese man that became a cardinal that I read about every once in a while, in prison, I think 13 years. In those kinds of desert situations, you can discover God's a famous passage in Hosea. I will take her to the desert and speak to her heart tenderly, etc. And we will renew our love from the days of Egypt when I took Israel, etc. Um, we've had the pandemic. Did it make people better? Apparently not. And now we have this lurking, war in Ukraine. And I was very disturbed by a post in Facebook from a scholar friend of mine about how even U.S. congressmen get up there and say that Ukraine is a very evil country and the president is very evil. The point being that the what we have now is war in every sense, no holds barred. And instead of war being a sword or a missile or a bomb or a tank, more than ever, war begins with ideas and facts or fake facts and propaganda and any other kind of manipulation possible to win the war, to win the power struggle. I mean, Goebbels already knew this with propaganda with the Nazis, and who knows in ancient history how many cases or precedents there may not have been. But today it's a free for all. Computer warfare, cyber war, interference with elections, just complete focus on ways to achieve power, whether it's political power in elections or whether it's geographical, geopolitical power, etc. No holds barred. And in a sense, war, what kind of rules could you really have in war? I mean, Truman was faced with a decision in World War II. it'll cost this much to defeat Japan with conventional war. But if we drop one or two atomic bombs, you're going to win the war a lot quicker, maybe even saving more lives. What you cross there is this atomic barrier, so that we we try to pretend, I guess, that we can, like the Mar- I guess the Marquess of Queensberry rules for boxing or something. You say, you can't use chemical weapons, you cannot use atomic weapons, maybe you can't use certain things or others. Well, um, it's like the torture thing in a way, this waterboarding torture. I myself find torture in any form abhorrent. But nevertheless, what I'm trying to describe is, once you have a struggle, what are the rules by which you should be bound? I think it's said that the Maccabees began to fight on Sabbath because otherwise they would have been wiped out. And then there would have been no one to observe the Torah if the Jews had been wiped out. So you see, these are the kind of problems that humans make for themselves, so to speak, or have no control, or have not demonstrated having any control over in all the thousands of years of civilization that we have had. We're back to square one with a war, except now it's a 21st century war where you attack on the basis of what is true. You attack with any other means that you have to win. And in the midst of all this, uh, God seems to be taking a back seat. And it is, I would say, being tried quite a bit. But again, I just saw a program on a wrestler, a black man, young man, without legs and missing part of one hand or something. He just won a wrestling contest, a big one. His father said God doesn't make mistakes. He had a purpose for making my son this way, and now we experience this triumph in every sense. So that sometimes when people say, how does God allow that, Down syndrome, or that this or that other thing? Well, don't, as we say in Spanish, don't tip with somebody else's hat. Don't speak for the person in that predicament one way or the other. That's why if somebody, went to have an abortion or something, you may be against abortion 100%, but you can't, necessarily put yourself in the place of that person. And so many other issues, sexuality issues, etc. Yeah, it's don't judge would be probably the best thing to do, which is what a lot of people still like to do because they're angry and they like to point fingers and things like that. And we all, in a way, point fingers. I point fingers at liars and people that like Trump. And I think I have good reasons to do that. I mean, I don't think you could say I can't criticize Hitler because Hitler had his points or something like that, as some people do. You have to take a stance. on what's right and what's wrong if you know what it is. And I think in Ukraine, you cannot allow bombardment of hospitals or even an invasion of a people that might want to be free. You have to sort of disentangle it from geopolitical things regarding maybe NATO or whatever it is, but you have to take a stand against violence. And that's why, for example, in this country, I'm totally against being able to buy guns without a real reason. What we have is totally crazy, and this Second Amendment thing, don't tell me about that, because that to me is the biggest bunch of crap I've ever heard. I took advanced constitutional law at Harvard Law School. You can pass amendments, you can revoke amendments, you can do whatever to have a reasonable foundational document. When the Constitution was created, blacks did not figure in it. Women could vote, etc. So the idea that the Second Amendment gives every idiot the right to have an arsenal is absolutely crazy. So I've been turning to God and I've been saying, you seem to be absent, you seem to be quiet. Maybe I haven't done my share, but nevertheless, you have put us back in the desert, and hopefully you will speak to our hearts. I think it's worth reviewing that line in Hosea, because it's very beautiful. It's read in the Mass of the Carmelite Virgins. So I will betroth you forever. I will betroth you in Zedek, or righteousness, and in Mishpat. I would say that's social justice or an orderly, just society. In Chesed, which is incredibly unexpected acts of love, sometimes joined to fidelity, although that's going to be a little different here later. And in compassion, rachamim, which has to do with the mother's womb. And I will betroth you in emuna, that would be the fidelity, the amen word that justified Abraham. And you shall know Yahweh, the yada verb of also intimate, even sexual union. And these are considered to be God Himself providing the dowry to His bride. The bride doesn't have to provide her own dowry. God will provide it and will betroth her, and then they will be together again, as in the days of the youth, etc., when I made her come up from the land of Egypt, etc. And she won't have false gods, the Baals, who she thinks are the ones providing her, Israel, with the wheat and the wine and the oil and all these blessings, etc. These are all passages to meditate upon. And if anything, if there's anything that I want to inculcate or promote, is the need to think and meditate. That's why when I have my TV on, it's usually a recorded program. I skip through the commercials, or I turn the volume off if I keep the channel on. And what I constantly think is, if these commercials are really the product of advertising companies who show results, Therefore, if these commercials are really effective in their tone and how they express themselves, they're addressing a mass of idiots. They are addressing people who have to be yelled at and who maybe will run out and go and buy that car because the sense of urgency of this commercial is such that's what it's meant to do. So that's an indication. That's why we have people driving around with phones, looking at their phones, and we have these performers in the Congress doing their 2 seconds of drama for their base or whatever, and all this stuff. Maybe even God wants to have a low profile in the midst of all this madness. Is there a true religion? I think that religion can almost be judged as we judge neurosis or mental health or psychosis. In other words, you can't get into proofs of God or which form of following God. I think with one exception that I'm going to talk about, which is Jesus' faithful witness. I'm a Christian. Because I believe these things. But you can say that if your religion makes you angry, if your religion makes you disdain others, if your religion makes you have crazy ideas or abusive ideas, or makes you submit to abusive behavior, then your religion is a form of neurosis. It's interfering. Neurosis I'm defining as thoughts and behaviors that are counterproductive to health and happiness. That's a simple definition of neurosis. Conflicts, obsessions, abuse of defense mechanisms, if you will, like denial, dissociation, some other defense mechanisms. Things that it's like, you can take your car to the mechanic and the mechanic's going to say, that sound you hear, it's because the whatever in the engine is doing this or that needs to be fixed or oiled or something. The same thing happens with behavior, which oftentimes is the product of what's in your head. So that you can judge if a religion is good for somebody or not based on how it makes that person feel, and if that, and one of the primary markers is anger, and if the person is angry, he's going to be hateful, he's going to be crazed. No one who is angry can think rationally. It's an excited, that's why the commercials induce excitement. It suspends the rational faculty and goes into a pure, maybe not even a volitive faculty, just the desire the adrenaline rush to fight or flight or something like that. So that, and then of course anger spills over into violence. From the abortion clinic guy that goes to kill the doctors to the Arab Muslim terrorists or whoever they are, or something else. Just an angry guy or person. So that would be a sign of a neurotic religion. And then if you're really crazy and you think you're going to go to heaven and with 13 virgins or whatever, 70 virgins or whatever, or you think, you kill people thinking you are worshiping God, which Jesus mentions in the Gospel of John in the Eucharistic Discourse. I think it's chapter 17. then that's a psychotic form of religion. And we call that, and psychosis is then a real break with reality. It's not just a bad alignment, but it's really a real break with reality. And we have plenty of that too around. So there's some words on the truthfulness of religions. But I wanted to end uh, speaking a little bit about Jesus and why I think he seems to be unique. And I use the expression which is found in the book of Revelation of Jesus as the faithful witness. So that in Revelation 1:5, Jesus is called the ho martus ho pistos, the martyr, the faithful or trustworthy one. The faithful or trustworthy witness. Martyr in Greek means a witness. And so you have, what was Jesus about? Jesus was about the good news to the poor. He's healing. He's including the ostracized, excluded sinners, publicans, etc. Even the city sinner woman, maybe a prostitute, maybe not, but let's say she was, crying over his feet, while the Pharisee is thinking, he's reasoning in his own way. He's thinking, he can't be a prophet because he doesn't know what kind of woman this is. Well, Jesus is way ahead of him, as often happens. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, Averroes, the Arab philosopher, said, or the Muslim philosopher. Jesus knows what kind of woman it is and knows that God loves this woman and wants to grace her just as Jesus has graced, verbal form of the word grace, the blind. If you look at Luke 7, it says here that he graced many, or he graced many blind persons with sight. Echarisato. And then he also graces this same echarisato. He's using this in this parable of a person who owed a lot of money compared to one who owed very little. Jesus says to Simon the Pharisee, his host in this meal, I have something to tell you. And Simon says, please, master. A creditor had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii, the other 50. Since they did not have the means to pay him, he graced both. Who of them will love him more? And then Jesus, or Simon responds, I suppose the one that was forgiven more. So anyway, Jesus has these meals. He heals, takes care of the bodies and minds of people, denounces injustices and wrongful abuses, makes very powerful enemies, And unlike Jeremiah, who had powerful friends who saved him from very powerful enemies until the end when Jeremiah was stoned, supposedly in Egypt, kidnapped and taken to Egypt, Jesus did not escape arrest or execution. So that does put a martyr seal on what he had said and done. That's why we talk about the martyrs as putting their money where their mouth is. And that's why we can judge, yes, we can, those who are like the false prophets. That's why the Bible is a blueprint for so many things. The false prophets, these 400 prophets that were at the court in 1 Kings 22, they all say what the king wants to hear, blah, blah, blah. That reminds me of some recent presidents we've had, or one in particular. Then the lone guy, this guy Micah, the lone guy, well, we don't want to ask him because he only says bad things. He never says it's going to be okay. We don't want to listen to him, but nevertheless, he's the one that uh, does say the truth. And he says, I see all Israel dispersed on the mountains like sheep without a shepherd. Yahweh has said they have no Lord. Let each one go in peace, each to his home. 1 Kings 22:17. So that Jesus pays for his beliefs. And you can say he really believed it. And the second part of the story, of course, would be he rose from the dead and was declared victorious by God, or made a victor by God, maybe even made the Messiah, or constituted as established as Son of God, as Paul says in the beginning of Romans, by virtue of his resurrection from the dead. So that would be the Christian faith, that Jesus was faithful and proved it to death. And therefore, in this double meaning of this Greek word pistos, he's both faithful and worthy of faith, trustworthy. That's used a lot in the letter to the Hebrews. And this faithful witness idea, to be just in a way, comes from Psalm 89, probably, where there's a lot of praise for David, really become like the messianic model, or the father of the Messiah. And it says, his lineage will last forever, his throne like the sun before me. Forever shall he remain like the moon, a faithful witness in the sky. And Ed Bashahak, a faithful witness in the sky, or in the clouds. So that you have this Bible, which is a whole story or series of stories about human history with a response of faith. And speaking of, what is the true religion, or what are true religions, I think that I'm reading the Jewish Study Bible, essays in the end there, and talking about mysticism, etc. Now, there you have a people, the Jews, who have done a lot with this excess mental energy thing. And a lot of it has gone into mysticism and minute study of texts. Even every word, every letter has significance. They don't believe in Jesus, but they are the roots, so to speak, our elder brethren of Christians. And I think a good example, I mean, we all have our faults, but a good example of what to do with the excess mental energy. I didn't quite think about this before I started talking, but it comes together that way. Study the Torah, study the mystics and the sages, and think of peace. Be under your fig tree, reading the Torah like supposedly Nathaniel was doing in the Gospel of John. Be thinking and meditating and reading rather than buying guns. Like I heard on TV the other day, a woman against masks. I'm going to come with guns and they're going to be loaded because I don't want to wear a mask. Governor of Florida the other day just scolded students, these innocent, maybe high school students behind him for wearing masks. This is all political anger fuel. When I smell that 10 miles away, I do look down on certain people. I do say, Homo sapiens, the nature of a human being is to be a knower or even wise. And I can smell from 10 miles away who is on a wisdom path and who is receding evolutionarily. Let's go back to the evolution idea. Retrogressing, regressing. And so with those words, I've tried to share some of my reflections. Again, a truth is paramount. That requires thinking, humility, calmness, leisure. Simone Weil, the great French philosopher who died very young, she was all in favor of any worker, factory worker, grass cutter. I see people cutting the grass around here. Manual workers, people without education. They should be given a dignity and an opportunity to learn something, to cultivate themselves, to not be left out. Just like they should be included in health care and other types of care. This is the message of Jesus. When you start hearing ways of exceptions, if, ands, buts, not practical, this, the other, blah, 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 the camel really means something else and the needle is something else, and yeah. Oh, but that other thing is very literal. When you start hearing that, you get into this T.S. Eliot thing, to finish with him too. A man who had to put a facade because inside it was all haunted. He tried, but at the best he came up with an imperfect life, as religious as he tried to be. So I guess to conclude, study the Torah. Grapple with the Talmud if you have to. Do something to occupy your head in a constructive way for yourself and for others. Maybe you can repair the world instead of being manipulated and angry and then violent. With that, I will conclude.